Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so wonderful to be here. What wonderful music. Thank you for the leadership and the team. And the brother we followed on Twitter last night, you said, was it Japan, the rising of the sun? Is that what you said? I'm actually from a state, the United States is 50 states. I'm from a state called Arkansas. You may have heard of Arkansas because of the President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was from the town that I live in called Little Rock, Arkansas. So Little Rock is the town Bill Clinton. That's where my wife Linda and I live, and we're from the state of Arkansas. What you might not know is the state of Arkansas is also mentioned in the Bible. I'm not sure you know this, but the state of Arkansas is mentioned in the Bible as well. And when it says that Noah looked out of the ark and saw. There are many things, Tennis is mentioned in the Bible. I don't know how that translates into Italian.
It's gonna be hard.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's been wonderful to be with you. My wife, Linda, if you didn't know, Linda, stand up, but on behalf of her, thank you so much for having us. There we go. And we really do appreciate it. And it's so wonderful to meet so many of you. And of course, our partnership across the pond, as they say here in England, in helping to fan these flames. This is a global movement. This isn't just Europe or the United States. This is, in my opinion, the single greatest thing that God is doing in the church in the 21st century around the world is willing us to walk, work, and worship Him together as one so we can advance a credible witness of God's love for all people in our increasingly diverse, painfully polarized, and cynical society. So wonderful what you're doing, wonderful what we're doing, what God is doing. Isn't it amazing what He is doing? And if you'll remember on our first talk, I just wanted to remind you that what we talk about in terms of once you understand the theology and the heart of God for the intercultural church and for church planting, growth, development, transformation, for justice, all that's involved with this, there are basically 7 core commitments to actually exercising this. We've talked about a number of them. You can take the picture again about these, but my brother asked me to emphasize one more time, and I so appreciate before I came up, every time I'm speaking, Dale comes to me and he says, "Can I pray for you? Can I pray for you?" And this is so foundational. The first commitment, again, is we must embrace God. This is the work of God and the Holy Spirit that we can't otherwise pull off through human means or effort. So I appreciate the heart for prayer, and that this is the foundation of everything, is laying ourselves before the feet of God, saying, "Here I am, Lord, send me," and be used. So 7 core commitments. We'll finish up with a couple this morning, and projector coming somehow. Did we lose the projector? We all need to pray right now. Next one, we'll wait for it to come. What I wanted to start with, though, and move as quickly as I can, is this disruption. This is a quick review. We talked about the commitments, but when we speak on the first day, I talked about disruptive leadership. The idea of what is a disruptor, the disruptive leadership that's required to advance intercultural church planting and transformation. And this really goes to the model of the church of the 21st century. Some of my brothers, Rich and Stephen and Susan, others of us talked about this the other night in a meeting. But really, it's a balanced attack. In order to repurpose our churches to redeem the community, which is moving away from a homogenous church to an intercultural church, which is not just thinking about saving individuals, but saving entire communities. Bringing redemption to entire communities, not just to people. We as a church have to learn to play simultaneously on 3 fronts. A spiritual front, a social front, and a financial front. The spiritual front is the church, the intercultural church, moving away from homogeneity to intercultural, to multi-ethnic. And this is done through church planting, through transformation. As we talk about the reverse church, that I learned this term here, all of this is involved in us playing on a spiritual leg that is repurposing the church into diversity, into intercultural, for the sake of the gospel. My brother and I talked about this the other day. It's not for the sake of diversity. It's for the sake of the gospel. Biblical and necessary, not optional. The second leg, though, is the justice leg, the mercy that Theo talked about today. Social justice and mercy and compassionate works. This is super important. Now, in the United States, many people compartmentalize this. They'll talk about the gospel, but they separate justice. You have many people in the United States who are like, isn't the gospel enough? Just preach Jesus. Just preach the gospel. And I'm like, yes, the gospel is enough if you preach the whole gospel. But people just want to focus on eternal salvation. But meanwhile, people are hurting. I was speaking with, Sarah? Joy, I'm sorry, from Greece, but she's in the brothels every week working with women who sex trafficking, prostitution. And yes, they need Jesus, but it's not enough simply to say, hey, give your life to Jesus, believe by faith. These people are hurting. They're trapped in systems and being exploited. We have to do the work of justice. What we have to realize. So let me just say this. In the United States, many people say, isn't the gospel enough? They don't want to touch justice. They're so afraid of social justice taking us away from the spiritual truth of the gospel. But then you have a lot of justice people. It's all about justice, 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 and marching in the streets and protest and speaking truth to power. Sometimes you want to say to the gospel people, where is the justice in all your Jesus? And then you want to say to the justice people, where is the Jesus in all your justice? See, here's what we have to realize. Justice is not peripheral to the gospel. It's intrinsic to the gospel. Perhaps you right, Micah, to justice. This is not something that's separate. It's not something that God finds in a hierarchy. That's Western thinking. It's collective. The gospel and the justice is intrinsic to that gospel. The point is, as churches, we must also do the work of justice. We must help and advance mercy and compassion and justice in real and tangible ways, whereby the community can hear us when we declare that gospel we know and love. And the last leg is financial. This is way too much to talk about. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. You can buy the book. It's all in the book. All right. No. But the last is so creating intercultural churches, advancing justice. But then the last leg is business and economics. The way the church has been funded in the 20th century is through tithes and offerings. On the mission field, it's people give, right? They support you as a missionary, and they give that way. In churches in America, I'm sure here too, we preach generosity. Sometimes we do campaigns. This is the economic model of the church. That is changing. We'll still have tithes and offerings, but churches are going to have to learn to advance economic disruption in their communities to create jobs, help to lower crime, repurpose abandoned property, as we have this wonderful place here that Martin and I believe Sarah have done. But we are going to have to learn how to become good entrepreneurs in business. And churches must do this. Because, number one, this too will give us an audience that the gospel will be proclaimed in an incredible way. When you create jobs, when you advance economics, when you redeem a property like this one, where there used to be needles and prostitution and it was an eyesore, and a church came in and redeemed this property, you don't have to preach redemption as much. People understand redemption. Do you see what I'm saying? And jobs are created. And in the United States, taxes are created, so we help the local community. And abandoned property is repurposed. And on I can go. The economic benefits, this is what the world is looking for, and it's what gives the church credibility when we do this. So we do it to advance the gospel, but also in a very pragmatic way. Tithes and offerings will not sustain our work in the future. We have to learn how to make money, but not a way to build our own kingdom, but to advance the kingdom of God. When you create business, like going on here, study this place with Martin and what they've done in creating jobs in the cafe and the bar and the event center, it's generating economic income to fund their mission. Because do you think all of this could be based on the tithes and offerings of this church? Do you understand what I'm saying? It could not happen. So they've learned that desperation leads to innovation. And when you're desperate, you learn to innovate. But the economic piece is super important to the future of the church globally. And all of this is discussed in a book called, well, here it is. Sorry about this. A book that I have called Disruption. If you're interested in these three legs of the stools and exploring this more, you can find it in this book, Disruption Online. I'll just finish this little section talking about disruption. All I wanted to do is introduce you. We can't just play on a spiritual front. There's justice and economics in the future that are involved. But remember this, Jesus did not say, let them hear your good words. Jesus did not say, let them hear your good words. He said, let them see your good works. Paul emphasized this as well in Ephesians, right? When he says, we have been created, what? See, this is the gospel. For we are saved by grace through faith, right? Not of ourselves, the gift of God. Stop. People, stop right there. That's the gospel, people. Yes, we're saved by faith through grace. Not of ourselves, the gift of God. Why were we created? For good words? No. Good works. So it's not works and words or words and works. It's words and works. And the works validate the words, the fruit of the seed of the gospel. We have to learn to play on three lines. Now, having said that, the seventh core commitment is one we call mobilize for impact, or here in the European context, we might talk about multiplication. The goal of an intercultural church is not merely to get a bunch of diverse people in the room and sing and worship God and the old song Kumbaya. Do you understand? That's not the goal. That's only a starting point. It's not the stopping point. Once we gather together, once we will ourselves to walk and to work and to worship God together as one, the goal is ultimately to take the unique expression of God's pleasure and God's power and turn it outward to bless the city, to bless your community, to lead people to Jesus, right? To advance the gospel, to promote the greater unity of the kingdom of God, and ultimately, collectively, to fulfill the Great Commission. At the end of the day, the goal is not to have a diverse or intercultural church. That's a starting point. The goal is to multiply and to mobilize ourselves for impact. The way we just discussed, advancing social justice, advancing economics, and giving the voice of the gospel, an incredible voice to this gospel that we proclaim otherwise with words. Now, having said this, in terms of mobilizing for impact, I just wanted to touch that. I want to finish my time with you by talking about the exact subject that Theo asked me to speak on today, and this has to do with our compassionate love for others. So again, we love others by declaring the gospel, by advancing justice, by advancing economics. All of that's a part of this. We mobilize ourselves to impact the world, to multiply and to reach others. At the root of all of this is love. As God loved us, we are to love others. Right? We are to, as it was said in Luke 10, love our neighbor. But let's talk about Luke 10 for a moment. You remember that the Gospel of Luke is written, and Luke is a disciple of who? Paul. When you read Luke, you're reading Paul. Because Paul is Luke's primary source. And he had other sources, but he's a direct descendant spiritually, as it were, of the Apostle Paul. So when you read Luke, you're reading the heart of Paul. And have you heard of Donald Miller in the United States? Or actually in Europe, Donald Miller? Some of you have. Well, Paul is a didactic teacher, but Luke is a storyteller. Luke tells the story of Jesus in the gospel and the story of the church in what? The book of Acts. He's a storyteller. But he's a disciple of Paul. Now, having said that, he tells us in Luke chapter 10 that a Mosaic lawyer, someone very steeped in Mosaic law, approaches Jesus. I know you know the story, right? And he says, how do I get in? How does this thing work, right? Jesus says, real simple. Love God and what? Love your neighbor, right? But Luke adds a comment here. And this has to do with the point of the story. He says, wishing to justify himself, the lawyer asks Jesus a question. Who is my neighbor? Now, this is the familiar story of what? What do we call this story? The story of the Good Samaritan. Did you know this story has nothing to do exegetically primarily with helping people when they're down and out? We learn that from the story, we teach it from the story, and there is nothing wrong with that. But Jesus does not tell this story to say when people are hurting, help them. He does it for a different reason. He does it to answer a question. And what is the question?
Who's my neighbor?
Who is my neighbor? So he tells the story, right? And you know the story. The priest passed him up. The Levite passed him up. What you may not know is Dr. Martin Luther King, who's right at the center of Westminster Abbey, which I went and saw the statue. Dr. King, a civil rights leader in the United States, etc. On the night before he was killed and shot in Memphis, Tennessee, he preached Luke chapter 10. And it's a wonderful sermon to read. But he talks about this. And he speculates. And he says, why does the priest not stop to help the man who's fallen? Why does he not stop to help? He says, well, maybe because the priests back in the day, they had to avoid dead bodies and keep themselves ritualistically pure. And so maybe the priest thought he was dead and didn't want to defile himself in his role as a priest. And so maybe this is why the priest passes him by. She said, what about the Levite? The Levite was like the deacon. So the priest is like the pastor, right? And the Levites are like the deacons. Why doesn't the Levite stop and help the man? He says, well, maybe because this is a bloody road. In fact, in the time of Christ, the road was called the bloody path. It's like a dangerous road, a dangerous neighborhood, one you don't go out into at night. And many thieves and robbers and different things would happen on this road. And so maybe the Levite, Dr. King says, thought that the man was only playing her, like he was faking. Right? And if I go and stop and help, his buddies will jump out of the bushes and they'll attack me and I'll get mugged. You know the term mugged in Europe, right? I'll get robbed myself. So maybe it's a game, it's a ruse. And so maybe this is why the Levite doesn't stop to help. And Dr. King explores it. But at the end of the day, what he says is that the reason that the priest and the Levite do not stop to help the fallen man is because they ask themselves fundamentally a question. And the question they ask is this: if I stop to help, what will happen to me? If I stop to help, what will happen to me? I'll be defiled. I might get robbed. And the focus is on them. But the Samaritan is very different. The Samaritan, and you know Samaritans, right, from our study of Scripture. The Samaritans are hated by the Jews in the south. The northern kingdom conquered by the Assyrians, the watered down bloodline, the watered down religion, right? John chapter 4, are your people right, or teach me the way to worship? Our people say this, your people say this. The north and the south is split. Good rabbis wouldn't even set foot in Samaria. You know all this. This, in the American context, is like a slave helping a master in the American context. A slave is not going to stop to help a master. Do you understand? It's just not going to happen. Your enemy is not going to stop to help you. Right? Someone where there has been historic hatred or animosity or racism is not going to stop. In the American South, a black man is not going to stop to help a white man. It's just not going to. You see what I'm saying? That's the context. And so it's the Samaritan, it's the black man in the American South who helps the white man. I don't know all the European context, but it's someone you would least expect to stop and help is the one who stops. Not the own, not the priest, not the Levite to help his own, someone very different. And Dr. King says, why does the Samaritan stop to help? Why him? What is happening? Because he asked a fundamentally different question than the priest and the Levite. Whereas the priest and the Levite say, if I stop, what will happen to me? The Samaritan says, if I don't stop, what will happen to him? What will happen? And this is the crux of the story. This is the point of the teaching, what we commonly call the story of the Good Samaritan. Why Jesus tells this story is to answer a single question. And the question is, who is my neighbor? And defined biblically by Jesus himself, a neighbor is not someone who lives next door to you, not someone you go to school with or that you work with or you sit next to. Your neighbor biblically is someone very different than you. Someone very different than you. Someone from a people group that there is likely to be historical animosity, what we would call racism, what the New American Standard in Ephesians 2 calls enmity, E-N-M-I-T-Y, enmity. It's a word that means historic animosity, where we would say racism. The people groups that you are likely to feel aversion towards. Boy, we're so different, or I don't like. Those are the very people Jesus defines in the story are your neighbor, are my neighbor. People very different. This is why he tells the story. So we have to understand fundamentally that all of this work of intercultural church is rooted in these two things. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? And love your neighbor, those who are very different than you, as you would yourself. And this is how we express a credible gospel in an increasingly diverse, painfully polarized, and cynical society. Now, to finish up my time with you, with this as a backdrop, let us also explore, in the context of loving our neighbor, what it means to be. Yeah, you can come change the background. Okay, so no, it's okay. Do you need the mic? Can you hear me or no?
Yeah.
We're good. Yeah. In the context of loving your neighbor.
Mark, maybe you can use it for the recording.
Okay. Is there one? Okay. How about that one? Is that okay? Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. In the context of loving our neighbor, and remember, and you in Europe will understand this even better than we in the United States, it's not just Mark DeYmaz love your neighbor, right? It's collectively church, love the community, right? So there's the individual love that I can have for an individual, but it's also us collectively as a church. We must love our neighborhood, right? The neighborhood that looks very different, the neighborhood that is changing, the neighborhood that is diverse. How do we collectively, both individually and collectively, love our neighbors as we do ourselves? And all that leads us to Matthew 5:9 and becoming peacemakers. Because again, at the root of all of this is the advance of the gospel through a love for God and a love for those different than us. And going further down, we can talk about this in the context of becoming peacemakers. Now think about the Beatitudes for a moment, right? In all the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, think about it. In every Beatitude, you get something for what you do. Do you ever think about that? Blessed, right, are the merciful, they shall be, or those who mourn, they will be what? Comforted. If you mourn, you're going to be comforted. Blessed are the meek, they will get what? They inherit the earth, right? So for things that you do, in every Beatitude, you get something for what you do, except for one. In only one Beatitude, do you not get something for what you do. You're identified with someone because of who you are and what you do. And it's this one, Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. This isn't a statement of identity. There is nothing closer, there is no work that brings us closer to the identity of Christ than being a peacemaker. Helping people come to know God's love, Ephesians chapter 1, that we are redeemed, adopted, chosen, forgiven, right? Through faith in Jesus Christ, right? You see what I'm doing with my hand? Individually, helping people get reconciled to God through faith in Christ, and then helping others to be reconciled to one another collectively, the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. There is nothing closer in our identity, no closer you can be to Jesus in terms of identity than you being as he was, a peacemaker. Reconciling men and women to God through faith in Christ, reconciling ourselves to one another, collectively loving our neighbors. This is how we're identified with the work of God. Now, there are peacemakers all throughout the Bible, and yesterday we spoke about canonic leadership, this idea in Philippians 2, where it's not that Jesus emptied himself of being God, but he emptied himself of power and of position and privilege, and he came down to give those without power, without position, without privilege, the same in the spiritual realm. And in each one of these peacemakers' lives, I chose some from the old and some from the new, you see this idea of kenosis, or canonic leadership. It comes from the Greek word kenosis, but these people laying down power, laying down position, laying down privilege in order to help those without and lift them up, and therefore to be peacemakers and those who love their neighbor, right? So Abram, he sets aside his afforded rights, his personal concerns for the greater good. Joseph refused to take advantage of position and privilege for personal gain. Think about what Joseph could have done, right? It could have been all about him. But God, he leveraged his position and he leveraged his privilege for the sake of his entire family and ultimately the nation of Israel. Esther, what a great example, right? She leverages her own position and her privilege and risks her own life to stand in the gap as a peacemaker for her people, right? You see these people doing this. Here's a few more. Think about Solomon. And he says this, when we're peacemaking, diffuse anger with a gentle reply. I love listening to Sarah. We had dinner last night, and some of us, and those who are, I know Marianne as well, working with stress and trauma and all the things that people, refugees particularly, experience, orphans. I was born without a father myself and grew up out of wedlock and still to this day deal with those types of scars. But the point is, people are hurting. People are angry. There's pain, right? But how do we advance the credible gospel? Diffusing that pain with gentle reply. Paul, speak the truth what? In love. There's a lot of people like to speak the truth, but if it's not rooted in love, no one hears. You say, but I love them. I got to tell them what they need to hear. There are many ways to tell someone what they need to hear, right? So we speak truth, yes, but in love, and in ways that people can hear. In America, in the United States, there's a phrase and there's a value currently, and maybe you've heard this term or this phrase, but it's speak to power. Have you ever heard that? Speak truth to power. Have you heard that here in Europe? It's this idea that there are people in power and position and privilege, particularly white people in the United States, and minorities must speak truth to power. And so that means making bold statements and challenging things like white privilege and all of these things, and they value speaking truth to power. What I try to encourage in the United States is it's not about merely speaking truth to power, but learning how to bend the ear of power to the truth you speak. Do you see what I'm saying? It's one thing for me to make statements about the system, but if all I do is alienate others, it doesn't do any good. And I'll share with you as I finish up. James, be quick to hear, right? Leveraging power, position, and privilege is all about positioning yourself to hear, to listen, to be slow to speak, and slow to anger. So, in our world today, we have social media, right? They have Facebook and Twitter and other forms by which we speak to men and women. So we do that face-to-face, we do that over coffee, but a lot of discussion takes place on social media. And this causes a problem for those of us that would be peacemakers, because sometimes we want to say things, but we're not thinking about how they'll be received. And again, in this idea of speaking truth to power, many people value making declarative statements about the truth from their eyes, what they believe. But for instance, maybe there's, what are they called in England? In America, you have Democrats and Republicans, the liberal left and the conservative right. In England, it's probably something like that, right? The conservatives and the labor and the conservatives, right? Well, to try to, best I can, use your context, if you are supportive of labor, and all you do in social media or in your conversations is say how bad the conservatives are, and you keep challenging their leadership, and let me, you know Donald Trump, right? I can use an American context because you know this man, Donald Trump. Oh, many people, many people, they don't like Donald Trump. They don't like him, his policies, what he says, etc. If you are someone in the United States that doesn't like Donald Trump, and all the time you get on social media, you are saying, Donald Trump is so bad, he's horrible, and he's this, and I don't like him, and this is how you talk, right? You know, on Facebook you get like thumbs up and people like things and you get a heart. Who likes those comments? When you say, oh, Donald Trump is horrible, he's so bad, who likes it? Who pushes a heart? All the people who think like you. You see? But all you do in the moment is further entrench and alienate the very people you would otherwise want to persuade. Like if I want to convince all of you that Donald Trump is horrible, and all of you like Donald Trump, the worst thing I can do is keep telling you how bad he is. because all you'll do is keep further entrenched in your position. I have to learn to speak in ways that others can hear, in ways that I can win others to my understanding and to my perspective. And this has to do with speaking truth in love and learning to be a peacemaker. To hold truth on one side, but have my arm outstretched this way so I can pull people together. And if we can't even pull ourselves together in intercultural churches, how in the world can we expect to influence this world? So it begins here. So in peacemaking, it says in Romans, so Paul says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Be a peacemaker. And in terms of social media and how we speak, you can take a picture. We try to avoid dogmatic statements. I might believe things dogmatically, but if I speak those things in a dogmatic way in this world, I only further entrench those who don't believe like me. So I avoid dogmatic statements. I learn to ask good questions, right? I think I shared that the other day. Help me understand. In the American context, I'm white. I ask an African American, I don't understand Black Lives Matter. Help me understand. I posture myself as a listener. I ask good questions. Third, we assume the best in others. To build intercultural churches, to advance a credible gospel in a diverse society, assume the best in others, right? We are all prejudiced, by the way. We all have a prejudging. That can be from the way we're raised, the country we're in, the current context. Anybody who says they are not prejudiced is not being truthful. If you think about it, we all begin with certain prejudices, prejudging of others. We work hard, we must work hard to put those aside. To not prejudge. The old adage that don't judge a book by its cover. If I'm white and I see a black, I need to work because I might have some predisposition to judge someone with black skin. I work hard to not do that, right? And to overcome some of the upbringing or the past or the context so I can assume the best in someone. Advance faith, not fear. So much of Christianity, certainly in the United States, is fearful. I want to advance faith. The very opposite of fear is to have faith. Advance that faith, peace, hope, and love. Always pause before you speak. What a good question or thing for peacemakers, right? We are often quick to speak, slow to listen, right? And quick to anger. It's the exact opposite of James. We must always pause before you. Acknowledge complexities. Boy, this is a good one. In the United States, I bet here, but particularly in the United States, because we're so independent and apart across the ocean, don't have to compromise. In America, everything is black, white, right, wrong, good, bad. There's no in-between. That in-between is called nuance. And there's complexity to these issues, right? I'll give you a great one for those of you from the Netherlands, right? Does God choose you or do you choose Him?
Yeah.
Does God choose? What? Yeah. That's the right answer. Yes. Yes is the right answer. Of course God is first. Of course God chooses, right? But He set the system up that we must also choose Him. I don't understand how it works, right? But I see this clearly in the Bible. So this is a complexity. This is a nuance. As you know, people have been killed over this issue, trying to say it's this way or this way without acknowledging complexity. We must learn to speak with nuance and acknowledge complexity in our world. And finally, add balance. Whenever you're discussing issues, whether theologically or socially, always try to bring balance to the discussion. Right? If someone is saying this, well, let's also consider this, because peacemakers, again, are like this. You have your arms stretched in both ways. And who is the ultimate peacemaker? Jesus Christ. Whose arms were outstretched like this in His position of death, saying, all come. All. Holding the forces of darkness and light, pulling us together. Sinner to be saved through faith in Jesus Christ. These are some of the principles of becoming a peacemaker in our world that helps us to love our neighbor, not only individually, but collectively as a church. And we love our neighbor in this day. The Bible says the men of Issachar understood the times. Do you know this verse? The men of Issachar understood the times. In other words, the way we advance the gospel in 1950 is no longer the way we can advance the gospel in 2020. It's not that the gospel has changed, but the way we express it, the way it will be heard, the forms that we do to advance it, spiritual, social, these are all changing in our time, and they must change for us to lead a credible witness. I'll finish with this thought. If this is a boat, okay, and this is the gospel boat, and we're trying to advance the gospel boat through the church, through our witness. Imagine this boat, and in the past, the winds were behind us. So the winds were blowing, and you have a boat, and you have sails, right? There's sails, and those sails are pitched to catch the tailwind. So the gospel boat, the church is sailing along, the wind's behind it, no problem. In our lifetime, what's happened? The wind is shifted. The wind is no longer with us, the wind is against us. You see? And now this boat is heading into a storm, is heading into strong winds. The problem with the church in the West is we still have our sails pitched to catch the winds that are behind. Do you understand? We have to change the position of the sails. How do you keep moving a boat forward into headwinds? You have to learn to tack, to change the position of your sail, to make quick adjustments to keep that boat moving. And that's what disruptive ministry is. That's what planning and transforming churches to become intercultural is all about. Loving our neighbor as we love ourselves individually and collectively, again, for the sake of the gospel. God bless you. Thank you so much for having me.